My name is Malka, singer. I was born in outside of Tel Aviv, on the outskirts of Tel Aviv.
What year?
Which, 1925. Now, my dad was born in Bialystok, which was sometimes Poland, sometimes Russia. My mother's family lived just outside of Lublin, Poland. They left just after the First World War. Well, Jews were not treated very well in Russia, or Poland for that matter. At first, I think he was like all the pioneers at the time, cleaning up roads, trying to guard different communities. I know he used to say that at night they rode on horses with guns, protecting a community. And during the day, they were clearing up rocks.
So this was 1918?
That was around 19, maybe 17.
Why do they need to ride around with guns at night?
Well, because the Arabs were constantly rioting. There were Arabs who actually in the middle of the night would go and just kill people. We relied on the British to protect us, but they didn't. And that's where citizens of the community would usually be guards at night. Mm-hmm. My grandfather got a parcel of land. When they were given the parcel of land, they built a wooden house. Now that house had 2 rooms, then they had a porch in the back. Now, they had no electricity, they had no running water in the house.
My name is Bilha, B-I-L-H-A, last name Ron, R-O-N. I was born in 1930 in Israel. At that time we call it Eretz Israel. We don't use the expression Palestine. My parents came from the Ukraine. Anti-Semitism was so strong, and so they both decided time for them to leave Ukraine. They met each other in Israel. I was born in Ra'anana. That was a very small village at the time, and now it's a big city. At the time, the water did not flow all the way from the mountain, from the Mount of Ephraim, all the way to the sea, because of sand dunes stopped all the exit. That's why so many swamps were in that area. They drained the swamps and they planted trees. They met each other in Petach Tikva, where they were building the roads there. It was the most marvelous stories they were telling about the time of the Chalutzim, the pioneers that came to Israel in the 1920s. They called them the Aliyah Shlishit, the third immigration. But we were attacked by Arabs when I was 3 years old and when I was 9 years old. There were attacks upon Yarkona, our village. We were very close to the border, and the Arabs were surrounded. I could see the Arab villages from my bedroom across.
Israel at this time was not
a state, under the British mandate.
But you had Arab villages and
Arab villages all over, and Jewish villages side by side. In time when we were friendly, the Arabs will come in. I remember when I was 4 years old, I remember Omar, his name, Omar. He would come, he put me on his knees, and he was so friendly. We had a wonderful relation with them. And then one day they will attack, and they will shoot. My father was commander of the Haganah, of the defense. And we, at age 14, we were called, the girls and boys, to swear to the Haganah. We put our hand on a gun and on the Bible, see that is a Bible, on the Bible, and we swore that the British were looking, because and they would try, if they catch you, you'll go to jail. Because the Arabs were attacking all over the place, and we had to be prepared to defend ourselves.
My name is Doron Lux. I was born in Petach Tikva, Israel, in 1952. Both my grandparents were born in Germany. and immigrated around 1936. They were probably among the last people who were able to semi-legally immigrate to Israel. Before the war, when the Nazi Party came into power, they were basically taken away from their homes, but it was a place in no man's land between the borders of Germany and Poland, with very little food and surrounded by guards, so they couldn't leave. The Polish people didn't want them back. The Germans threw them out. So basically they were in no man's land. So one day they were just marched into a train station, driven down all the way, I think it was like a week's travel, and then boarded a ship that moved them to Israel. Oh, my father was 6 years old when he came to Israel, and my mother was 4 years.
So this is about 1936.
1936, right. When they came to Israel, the system was you would come to Israel. There was no organization that gave you a house or a place to stay. You basically went to relatives. They would close a balcony or a corridor, and you would stay there for 3, 4, 5 months until you get yourself organized and you rent a place and you start to work and you make some money. And that's how you start your life as a new immigrant.
So I'm Danielle Gurion, and I was born in Tel Aviv in 1946. Well, my grandmother wasn't living at Poland when the war broke out. She was living in Vienna with my grandfather. However, Austria became Nazi in 1939, a year before the war, in what we call the Anschluss. So the situation in Vienna was already very much dire. There were the flags, the Nazi flags on the buildings, and the loudspeakers hurling, the Nazi propaganda. So they ended up running ahead of the Nazis and came to Bulgaria. And at that time, the Polish government took away the citizenship of all the Jews that were abroad. So they couldn't even go back to Poland, which was a good thing because they would have been exterminated with the rest of the family in Auschwitz. So this was illegal immigration. But there were 4 months on the Black Sea, on the Aegean Sea, on the Mediterranean Sea, trying to break the blockade and sneak into Israel illegally.
And how many people were on that ship?
About 700. Yes. And when my parents saw the movie Exodus, they said that's a luxury liner. They landed near Gaza someplace, and they waded through the water to break the blockade.
How close could they get to land? Because I would think the ship would have a deep draft.
No, people waited with boats.
So they had small boats that would take them off?
Yeah, people came from land to the ship. It was organized, yeah.
But this was the year of
1939.
As the war developed and the British put a white paper and refused to let immigrants come, only small number could come with certificate, and refused and put in the white paper the Jews are not allowed to sell land, to buy land from Arabs. Arabs will not sell any land. All the kibbutzim and the kibbutz and moshavs, all of them were bought by money from the JNF, Jewish National Fund, collected money in America, in the world, and bought land from Arabs or from the government. They paid for this land. So the tension became more and more between the British, even though as the war developed, and they would not let the immigrants come. And we knew that they are dying in the camps in Europe. We start to hear the news from 1940, even before, like Kristallnacht. We knew what happened in 1938. We knew what's happening in Europe from the news. We knew because of the family were in Europe. My father brought one brother from his family of 10. The rest of them remained in Europe. In 1942, when the Nazis came to the Ukraine, they killed all of them. My mother did not have cousin, a brother, a sister. There were 5 people in her family. They killed her parents. They killed my father's family. There were all this huge family of generations that lived there. Was left one brother and his wife that happened to be, he was in the Russian army, and she was visiting her mother in Moscow, and with 2 little children. They are the only one left from this family. All the people in Yarkona, all their families were in Poland or in Russia, and 2 in Germany, 2 families. We did not see a grandfather or a grandmother. We didn't have relatives. We did not know what is to come. I mean, there were no relatives. Only our family and maybe an uncle, sometime this one, or a couple of cousins.
How did you find out what happened?
Oh my goodness, how we found out. In 1945, the war was over. One day they came together, and came a girl 16 years old that escaped from a pit, that she was shot with the rest of them. She crawled out from the pit. She was alive. And somehow she came through the illegal immigration, which is another big story to tell. She came, and I was in a meeting when she told all these people gathered in Tel Aviv in one room, and she said to them, "You don't have families anymore." They all were buried in mass grave, all of them. Maybe you'll find one here and one there. I don't think, she told my mother, "There's nobody left from your family." She came from my mother's town. No one left, no one. All the people, men, women, children, old, young, there's nobody left from her family. So really, I tell you, the Holocaust, if somebody said, people didn't know, they know. I can tell you for myself, and how I knew. I really, and and I tell you, I asked my father. My father lived to be 94, my mother died when she was 82. I asked my father, I remember that day when this woman told you, I did not see any crying, any screaming, any fainting. There was just silence. How could it be? He said, we were in such a shock. We just could not even react. It was beyond human emotion. We just could not, we cannot even describe. All I can tell you, that after that day, my mother's face turned to sadness. She was really, there was sadness in her face all the time. And they didn't talk about it. That is the truth. They didn't talk about it.
Yeah, my name is Samuel Ran, but I was born with a Polish name, Rakowski. I just changed my name in Israel. And I was born in 1924 in a little small town in Poland, and the name is Kazimierza Wielka. The place was not as big as the name is. My father was a very progressive person, a politician, and he was a hardened Zionist, you know. But you know what a Zionist in Poland was? A Zionist in Poland was a man who collected from another man money and sent a tilled man to Israel.
Were several times in a cattle car?
I was 4 times in the cattle car.
4 times.
Yeah.
And the first time you went in there, what was that experience?
I'll tell you something. When you get it in that cattle car, the trouble with this is that you don't know where you're going. Whatever they tell you, you don't believe. See, I was in a cattle car because they moved me from one camp to the other camp.
But did you know that?
But most of the millions of people went to dead camps,
right,
and they'd never seen the light of that. But so you don't know where you're going because you already know what's going on. But the main thing that you don't know where you're going. When they shut the door up, the truth is you become an animal in that car. And then when you get out from the car, and you get in the shower room, and you don't know what's going to come out from that shower, gas or water.
And when water comes out?
The water comes out, you know, the first time when we went to that place there, we start singing a song. There's a Hebrew song. Mayim Chai, Mayim life, Mayim makes life, water makes life. The Hebrew song like this. That's every time you get in that cattle car, you don't know where you're going. It's the most. I think, generally, I think that the cattle cars were the worst suffering of Jews. You know, millions of people were moved in these cattle cars. Normally, when I was in a cattle car, I was a day, a night, and the next day maybe. But some people were in these cattle cars coming from Greece, from Saloniki, in August, in the summer. When they came to Auschwitz, half of them was dead in their cars. They were traveling 7 days without water, without food, without this. Half of the people were dead in there. And what's going on in these cattle cars, the strong people reaching out for air, they don't care if they trample over young people, old people, something like this. So it's the most frustrating, the most suffering place of this. See, you go in the gas chamber, it takes 10 minutes, you're dead. But here you travel 2 or 3 days, or 4 days, or 7 days. Nothing. You know, they give you, they put in a bucket of water in the corner and a bucket for sanitation. You know, the ghetto of Warsaw had 500,000 people. In 2 months, from July 22nd to September 18, they moved 356,000 people from Warsaw to Treblinka for death. 350,000 people in 2 trains a day. They opened up Treblinka death camp. There was no working there, only a death camp. Amazing story. But I was liberated on May the 2nd, 1945. We were a group of about 2,000 of us in a forest. And then in the night of May the 2nd, the guards disappeared, so we were free. After the war, what happened is that Polish became communist. So there was a lot of bad things. And then you came back to one of your property, they killed you. They killed 1,500 Jews after the war. So I went, on the way, I stopped in the city of Katowice. And I walked out in the street, and here I seen somebody, a friend of mine. So he said, why don't you join us? He was working for the Bricha. You know what the Bricha is? The function of the Bricha was, first was to organize all the young people for purpose to smuggle them into Palestine. And then there was very bad things in Poland. There was 250,000 Jews came back from the Soviet Union, who survived. So there was a big pogrom in Kielce. So there was a panic. So we moved thousands of Jews out of Poland, smuggled to the borders. We smuggled them to Germany, and we smuggled them to Italy. So from there, wherever they go, they went to all kinds of places during the time. So I was a foot soldier, smuggling to the borders. This job was probably my best job in my life ever been. We had in Poland fighting with the monasteries to get the Jewish kids out there. I happened to have a group, you see a picture of it, that I smuggled from Poland. There was a little kid I slept on my back, and then I smuggled them back from Czechoslovakia to Germany. And then when I had an order to go to Palestine legally in March 46. So when we got to a place in Germany where they concentrate all the people, the same kids came to that place. So I took the same kids to Palestine, to Israel.
Well, they got to, if it was illegal, how did they get?
Yeah, they got ships. I think they had 60 ships, I think, taken to Israel, and the British were intercepting them. Most of them, they took them to Cyprus. There are 2 big camps in Cyprus. So the British were intercepting all these ships. In 1939, the British government decided, they call it a white paper. They decided to stop Jewish immigration, except for 5 years, 15,000 people can come a year. 15,000 people a year for 5 years. And at the same time, they restricted that Jews cannot buy land from Arabs either.
What do you want to know? My name?
Yes.
Ruth Salton. I was born, my name was Sima Nickelsberg. And there was this gentleman by the name of Zucker. He was one of the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. He told me that I should go and work for their organization who is working to help survivors go to Israel. The name of the organization was Bricha. I went from town to town, from city to city, smuggling people over the borders. We collected people from Austria, from Hungary, from Czechoslovakia, because lots of survivors went back to their homes to look for their family. We had to gather them and send them from border to border to get on a ship to Israel. We took them to the Alps. We get up, walked up with them, and the other side, there were others who took them down. Of course, the British didn't let them in. There were problems. Like the Exodus was sent back to Hamburg. The Exodus was already in Israel. The British sent it back.
So how did you get them, the children, to leave, those people?
We went from town to town to look. We found them. They were already not Jewish children. They already wore crosses. There were some when were adopted by the Christians. Some children, the other people loved. He didn't want to give them up, and we had to take them, and we took them.
Did you ever meet anyone that you helped bring over?
Lots of people I met. I came in Israel. When I arrived in Israel, the father had a little grocery store in a village. And Esther, the little girl, was playing with non-Jewish kids. There were no other Jews. So Paul spent the house, the grocery store with the Jews, with the parents. So the little girl survived. And I came over there and I found the girl. And of course, she didn't want to go. And the adopted parents didn't want to let her go. So, when she went to school, me and the boy drove down. He said, Esther, get in and we give you a ride. And she never went back. And now she lives in Israel. She's a grandmother.
So why wouldn't you want people to know about that beautiful thing?
But I did a terrible thing by kidnapping.
No, you did a mitzvah.
What can they do to me now?
Yes.
I'm 90 years old. Well, I don't know. I was a young girl. What made me, I could have found a guy, got married. The others did. Go to the P camp and meet somebody and that's it. But I didn't do it. I don't know why not. I just went on from place to place, from deed to deed.
I tell you what happened is, I joined a group of survivors, and we were ready to go to create a settlement. At the beginning, in 1947, we did not get the trouble from the Arabs. But what happened is that in November 29, 1947, they decided in the United Nations to divide Palestine. Remember this? That started trouble with the Arabs. We were getting supplies and mail by a little piper. Israel had two pipers. You know what a piper is? A little plane, two-seat plane. But 2 weeks later, on December 11, hundreds of Arabs attacked us. We was only 16 people there with 4 women pregnant in that place there. So they attacked us. The 2 guys went outside, and they were the first one wounded. One guy was wounded there, and I was wounded on the parapet on the roof there. I was very bad shape. I was bleeding like, there were no steps to go in from the top roof. There was the guy was bringing mail with a little paper. When he came over, he seen that Arabs attacking us. So he went back to another place, Bet Eshen, and picked up a kid from the Palmach, and took the door off of the door. And they came back. They threw a few hand grenades, and the Arabs disappeared.
They threw hand grenades?
The Arabs ran away.
They ran away.
Yeah, the British leave the day when Gurion announced the state.
Which was when?
On May 14th of May 1948. And I met my wife in Israel. She was young there. I didn't pay attention to her. She was 17 years old when I first met her.
And you were how old?
I was 6 years older, and I got wounded, and I was in a hospital in Tel Aviv. She came to visit me, and she apparently got so that's where we started doing for God. And that's why we married in 49.
In 1947 and 1948, we had a greatly anti-Semitic State Department, which I may talk about in a few minutes. Every passport that was issued that year by the State Department had a stamp in it, an actual stamp in it that said, not valid for travel to a foreign country for purposes of serving in a foreign army. I was 18 years old. We knew that the Arab countries, surrounding Arab countries, 5 surrounding Arab countries, were going to invade Israel. They said they would. I saw a bulletin, a notice on a bulletin board that said the National Students Association was going to have a ship going that summer to England, and then we were supposed to get free passage to France for a week, and only 2 listings in the entire Paris, in the entire Paris phone book began with the word JUIF. And I took the underground, a subway, to the first one, and it turned out to be a kosher butcher shop. And I asked the manager where the Israeli embassy was, and he said, "Oh, they're just building it," and he gave me the address. There was a secretary in there, and she asked me what I wanted, and I said I wanted to join the Israeli army. And she got a little piece of paper about this big, and she wrote out an address, didn't say one word to me. 2-room apartment, and sort of Haganah posters on the wall, and 2 Israeli young men there. "How do we know you're Jewish?" And so I recited the Aleph Bet, and that satisfied them, but they knew I was quite young. They had 3 doctors that examined people, and I passed that, and they gave me a ticket to Marseille. And they gave me the papers of a displaced person who has survived the Holocaust in I guess a German work labor camp named Zerich Itzkovich. And so here I was, a Holocaust survivor, a displaced person, and I was from Danville, Virginia. But it's hard to describe this ship in any real way. It was a banana boat, a banana boat. And all around, if you look around this room, you would see shelving, 3 shelves high, a bare light bulb in the middle of the room, and we were each given a place on a shelf 20 inches wide. They put 1,700 people on the ship, and I think they must have been 6 lifeboats. 24 other Americans who just come from the United States joined us, so there were about 25 of us. Of course, there were no toilets. It was built to carry a crew of 13 people, 13 laborers who worked in the holds of this banana boat. There were 25, say, of us, and 1,700 displaced persons, and they were used to this. They hadn't lived this well in the slave labor. The climax of this is when we arrived finally, after 5 days, in Haifa Harbor. We weren't really home yet because the United Nations had observers at the docks to check everybody who got off of that ship to make sure they weren't foreign volunteers volunteering for the Israeli army. A little tugboat came over beside the ship, and we were asked to jump down, the Americans, the 25 of us. And so we jumped down, and people caught us when we jumped down. It was at night, and the little tugboat chugged away and went over to another part of the dock, and we evaded the United Nations observers who were trying to keep all foreign volunteers from coming in.
I'm talking about after 1948. Israel was young. It was a young country, not prepared to accept so many Jews. What do you do? How do you solve this issue? So they started to, first of all, the American Jews, you know, all the donations. Golda Meir at the time used to go to America all the time, from one state to another state, to get donations. They needed at that time housing. Where are you gonna house those families? And
these are the people that were in the camps.
Yes.
Talking about after World War II.
But even after that.
In the TP camps.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you had to transport them to some places, normal housing. How many people can live in one bedroom or just like a big studio? It was a very big economic problem. And each immigration faces different problems.
Hi, my name is Zucker. I was born in 1936 in Landshut, Poland. The war broke out in 1939 and we passed to the Russian side of the border. My father was taken after a short time to Siberia to work in the coal mines, and I was with my mother. I was by that time maybe 4 years old. I was the man of the house. You know, there was no running water, there was no electricity, the food was potatoes. We survived, you know, they didn't kill Jews, there was nothing to eat, but we were able to survive. In 1945, Stalin was allowing the Polish Jews to leave Russia. The Russian Jews were not allowed, but the Polish Jews were allowed to read. There were 300,000 Polish Jews that came to Russia. And from there, my mother had an uncle in Belgium. So he came over and smuggled us out. He made some papers up, and we were able to move from the DP camp to Belgium. And we were there for 2.5 years, and then the State of Israel was established. You know, after all this, what was happening to us and being discriminated and called dirty Jews, and Jews go to Palestine, you know. So we needed to be in a place where everybody is basically Jewish and they don't discriminate just because you are Jewish. Anyway, we went with a Greek ship from Marseille, and at that time food was rationed. It wasn't good condition, but I thought that I'm in paradise. Nobody's calling me Jew. I see policemen. I didn't believe policemen are Jewish. I didn't believe the porters that were carrying stuff. They cannot be Jewish. Jews don't do this type of thing. But they were Jewish. And I was even looking at the birds. Is it possible that the birds are Jewish? I mean, it was for me a tremendous experience, like freedom, you know. And my mother's brother had a boarded house in Tel Aviv with wood on the windows, no floor. But my father said, can we move into out of the tent? So my father decided we are going to sell corn. He had a big pot that you put corn in there with water, and people would pass by, you sell them a corn, you know, we put some salt, and I was standing there helping were selling corn.
Outside your house?
Yeah, outside the house, corn on the cob, outside the house, I was sleeping with my father on the kind of a porch that was on the floor, on the first floor, and my mother was inside, and my sister was in the hallway, a little bed there. So the condition wasn't that good, but we didn't complain. We were free, and I started school. For me, it was a new experience. I had to, because my first school was in Russia, Russian, then came back to Poland, it was Polish, then I didn't go to school, then I came to Belgium, French, and then I came to Israel, I had to speak Hebrew.
You didn't speak Hebrew?
No, not very little, maybe I spoke Yiddish mostly with my parents. Then when I finished 8th grade, it was recommended, it was also my mother had an influence. She says, you need to have a profession. No matter what, if you go later on to school, that's a different story, but you need to have something. So I went to Ort, the family Ort. I was accepted to Ort. It was in Jaffa. And it was a vocational high school. I went for 4 years to that high school, and then when we finished the 4th year, that's when the Sinai War broke out, 1956.
What was that? Can you describe that?
The war?
Yes.
Well, it was, Nasser was the leader of Egypt, and he threatened to always to come and conquer, to fight Israel, But then the French and the British got involved. They wanted to occupy the Suez Canal, so because he was blocking it constantly whenever he felt like. So the Israelis got involved too, and got into Sinai and occupied Sinai. At that time, Israel did not have technical people. There were no Jewish auto mechanics or Jewish electrician. This was not a field that Jews really learned at that time. Jews were not, so they needed auto mechanics, tanks mechanics, airplane mechanics. So the entire class that graduated was dispersed into various technical segments of the army.
My name is Gurion, and I was born in the old Soviet Union in the Ural Mountains about 3 months after the end of World War II. Stalin agreed to let anybody of Polish descent leave Russia. And in Germany, my father, we were in a DP camp, a displaced people camp, and it's amazing how much vitality Jewish people have, even as refugees. They've established a vocational school, a theater group, a soccer team, a kindergarten, everything. It's just amazing. Immediately after the Independence War, 1949-50, Israeli military was nothing. So a lot of the Israeli operations against the border, across the border, failed, and units will basically retreat without completing a mission, and units would leave dead and wounded people on the enemy side. So Ben Gurion and Dayan went to Arik Sharon, who was a 21-year student, history, at the Hebrew University, and told them, we have to start changing the perception of the Israeli soldiers. And he formed a small unit. It was called Unit 101. And they retaliated in the same way as the Arab Fedayeen did in Israeli villages. The main purpose was to basically instill fear. Say, you guys are doing it to us and we can do it. And they did the amazing thing. It was a unit of 10, 15 people. And that spirit or discipline that you never retreat until the mission is accomplished. You never leave a body of a dead soldier or a wounded one in enemy territory became the foundation of the values of the IDF.
My name is Tova Rabunski Farkash. My maiden name is Farkash, which is a Hungarian name. I was born in Bricha in April 22nd, 1944. We didn't have no money because even whatever my dad had, and especially the apartment, we had to leave behind. And when we went in Israel in May 1951, he had to leave everything behind. We went to Israel, I think maybe with $40, with a very small amount of money. We went with a ship. We could have only a small bag of clothes, and we got to Israel with nothing. You know, in 1951, you couldn't go to Israel. You had to wait, you had to buy your way.
So how did you get there?
Well, my dad gave all the money and everything, whatever he had, he left everything behind. He didn't want anything. And somehow he got the visa and we were able to go with nothing. But other people, you know, they stayed till 1956, I think, 1956 or 1957, that you could have left the Russian occupied territories and go to Israel if you
So
so
the Russian government wouldn't let you leave?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. We lived in a Ma'abara is an absorption center that like in a tzrif. You know what's a tzrif? A tzrif is a hut made out of tin. We lived there for like a year and a half, and it is one big room from tin. In the summer it's hot like an oven, and in the winter you got an orchestra because it's raining. No running water, no toilet. We had to go, you know, out to the toilet and out to the running water and take a shower. My father got a job. He was working doing the roads, you know, the roads, and he was like a really an educated, nice person, had to work the hard labor. Being, you know, he didn't make a lot of money. We didn't have no money or nothing, so my older sister Esther and my brother, they were sent to Jerusalem to boarding school, and we never wanted to go back. Even though many people, you know, went back to Romania, to Hungary, because they couldn't take that life. My brother having his bar mitzvah when we were in Hartov, and he had to pay us, you know, he was a cute boy. And obviously we didn't have too much, so my mom bought 2 chickens and she put them outside, you know, it was on a Thursday. She put them outside, she tied them up outside our hut, so that the next day on Friday she can take them, you know, to the shochet and so that she can make chicken soup and chicken. But at night a fox came and ate up one of the chickens, and we were left with 1 chicken for 6 people. And we also had my father's sister that survived Auschwitz, and her husband came to celebrate with us my brother's bar mitzvah. My brother has 2 children, a son and a daughter. And when his son was bar mitzvah, he made a big bar mitzvah because he said that has to be made up for his bar mitzvah and for his son. And it was really a beautiful celebration. Started in Israel, even though it was in hardship, and we were much better off before, back in Bricha, but that is part of our past. It's not important for us. It's only a place that we were born.
So all this period, you know, when we were growing up, terrorists, at that time they were called Fidain, would come in from Egypt, mainly Egypt and Jordan, into small kibbutzim and throw a grenade into homes or get into a settlement and kill a family. And this was all the time, or in the Golan Heights. They were shooting on the kibbutzim and killing people. So in between, Israel all the time responded in skirmishes. So it wasn't a peaceful time, but it wasn't a declared war. Israel in the second half of May 1967 was full of doom and gloom. Okay. I remember our foreign minister, Abba Ibn, who was very well known, traveling from one civilized country to the other one, France, England, US, every place, and saying, please do something. Nobody did anything. And Egypt basically broke international law, clearly, because what they did is they closed the Straits of Tiran. To add to this, on June 2nd, which was a Friday, Jordan joined that pact. So now you have Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. So Monday, which was June 5th, Israel started with an attack. Within 40 minutes, there was no Arab Air Force. And the bombing was done on airfields in Egypt, in Iraq, in Jordan, in Syria, all around. So within 8 o'clock in the morning, by 10 o'clock there were like 450 airplanes gone. At the same time, armored forces started to move into the Sinai. By Monday evening, a major part of the operation in Egypt was already almost done.
Now Jerusalem at this point is occupied.
Jerusalem is divided.
Divided.
There was never a plan to really liberate Jerusalem. When I was growing up and I learned to swim at the YMCA, which is just across from the King David Hotel, and the King David is exposed to the wall.
Right.
When we would get off a bus, sometimes a Jordanian soldier would just play and shoot. So when Jordan started attacking, Jerusalem Brigade had their armored division, and they moved up on the mountain hill, and the infantry got ready on the other side. So we came from one side, they came from the other side. Everybody was rushing towards the Wailing Wall. And the Wailing Wall, today you see it because it's large, and there's a big opening plaza in front of it. When we came in on that Wednesday, there were houses.
Okay. There was no plaza.
There was no plaza. There is no access. But what's more is it's all mined, all land mines. The whole old border between West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem had anti-personnel mines from the 48 war.
And that's where you came?
That's where I spent 50 days, and that was really terrifying. I mean, yes, I fought on Wednesday afternoon in the old city, and I had a few friends killed. Even though one of the major causes of the war was the continuous attack and shelling from Syrian heights, from the Golan Heights, Dayan did not attack Syria until the last 1.5 days. And there was a lot of concern about how many casualties will happen when you go up the hills. So, but on the final day, on a Thursday, all these kibbutzim came down to Tel Aviv, to Dayan's and the chief of staff's offices, and basically said, look, if you're not going up there, all of us are leaving. So then Israel went up there, and there was some very serious fighting, and we took the Golan.
Was involved in the situation in the Suez Canal, a shooting war of about 2.5 years.
When did it start?
1970. Israeli on one side of the Suez Canal and the Egyptian on the other side, and basically the Suez Canal ceased functioning and nothing was going through that. Yes, there were operations on both sides. They tried. Most of them failed. Our side crossed more than once. There were several operations. Information. Who's on the other side, what kind of weapon they have. Some of them was putting listening bugs on their communication lines. I was released in, I believe, March of '73, and then went home, and then in October the war started. Right, the first days of the war were a total surprise. Israel was not ready, didn't think that it will happen, and was caught, surprising, by the attack of the Syrian. So the Syrian division, especially on the southern side of the Golan Heights, advanced so far, way beyond their targets that they had at the beginning when they planned that attack. And they were afraid that they're drawn into a trap. the fact that they stopped for the night gave us the opportunity to call in all the reserve units. And first thing in the morning, mounted a counterattack. And if we had to mount a counterattack while they are in Israeli cities, that would have been a very bloody battle that would have involved civilians. But there was nothing to stop them, other than their own decision. When you're a medic, the only thing you see is injured or dead people. Because the first 2 days, the first day of the war, there was a surprise attack, our soldiers basically retreated to that line, and they were advancing, and you could see them, and that's where we started our war, and climbed our way back up on the western hills of the Golan Heights, and then pushed them back all the way back into Syria, back to the pre-73 borders. I took care of Syrian wounded soldiers.
These are people that were captured?
They were captured. I mean, there were soldiers on the other side. Our job was to kill them, their job was to kill us. So, you know, we knew though, or at least felt, that an Israeli soldier, if he falls into their hand, will not get the same treatment. But we didn't think that, or at least I didn't think, that that because of that you need to stoop to their level. It's just not the right thing to do.
My name is Illana. My maiden name is Goldberg, and my married name is Gross. I was born March 20th, 1954. I was born in Latvia, in Riga. And through Hayas, it's a Jewish organization who helped the Jews to reunite with their families, we got our visa to immigrate to Israel. At the age of 18, you go for a special training. Everybody goes through the special training for 1 month. I was alone, and I was listening to the communication on the other side. And suddenly you listen that all the Russian advisors, at that time the Russians were in Egypt, all the Russian advisors are leaving, not by themselves, but with their families. The first bomb that fell, it was on our base. And actually, I heard the pilot who took off from the base in Egypt. Yeah, well,
Was that close?
Yeah, well, it's intelligence. We're all not. Our base was hurt. My friend was killed. We were not exactly prepared, you know. And he slept in his room when the bomb fell. So, yeah, it was pretty sad.
But in '73, there was a surprise attack, as you know, in Yom Kippur. What they do over there is when there's like a major holiday, is, you know, a lot of people want to go home, and the Syrians came down a long way. There was just one battle left, and if they had conquered it and succeeded, all the way down towards Haifa was open. I mean, this national slogan, or not slogan, the national motto about Masada, you know, is real. And that's the way a lot of Israelis feel. It's real. And, you know, the whole country is saying there will never be another Masada.